An apology came from a convicted killer that said drugs made her do it, and tears came from a family that has spent nearly 3 decades trying to heal. It's a picture of Anna Mae Florence that's faded over the decades, but in court today, memories of Anna Mae were still vivid.
And I did love her, and I still love her, and she meant a lot to the family.
We got you and you ain't getting away this time. Hey friends, and welcome to my new true crime channel. I'm not really sure what to call this, but by the time this video goes up, obviously I will have a name. And I decided to move all of my true crime content here. If you are coming from my Bougie Hustler TV channel, welcome back. And to everyone else, welcome. I'm AJ. So today we're going to be discussing the case of Anna Mae Florence, and today's story is probably going to piss you off. There are so many areas where the ball was dropped, then this case would not have gone cold. So in any case, we're going to go ahead and get right into it. Don't forget to subscribe if you like to hear true crime stories, because I have a ton more on the way. So the year is 1987 and we are in Columbus, Ohio, and it's a Sunday on June 26th, which also happens to be the day after my birthday, which is why I remember all of these dates so well. And Anna Mae Florence is at home in her apartment, and she's getting herself together to spend the day with her family, specifically her sister and her brother-in-law. Oh, also guys, if you hear me clearing my throat for whatever reason I failed to edit out, I'm so sorry. I'm getting over a cold. So in any case, like I said, Anna Mae was getting ready. She's getting ready to meet up with her sister and brother-in-law. They're actually coming to her house to pick her up when she hears a knock at the door. So she already knows it's them because, like I said, they're getting ready to spend the day together. So she goes to the door and she opens it, but the person is an unexpected guest. So I want to go ahead and put a pause right there in the story. I want to talk about how Anna Mae got to Columbus, Ohio, and then that will kind of like circle back to where we just left at. So Anna Mae was born in the South. She was born and raised in Alabama. So she's a country girl, and she grew up, got married, and also became a widow all while she was in Alabama. Now, because she didn't have any children, she was alone in Alabama. And so this is where Anna Mae's relatives decided that they would come together, put some money up, and move her from Alabama to Ohio so that she could be closer to the family, because although she didn't have kids, she did have nieces and nephews. They just all wanted her to be closer together, and on top of that, they wanted her to experience a different type of life than what she was used to, because this is 1987, so segregation was very much still a thing down south. You know, they still had the whites only bathrooms, the blacks only bathrooms, black people sit in the back of the bus, you know, that whole thing. So KKK was very prevalent at that time as well. So it was just not the best area for black people to be in. I think even to this day, there's probably still some parts of Alabama where you probably can't go. And it's just wild that in 2023, not much has changed. But in any case, they just didn't want her down there by herself, and they just wanted her to be closer to home. So they moved her up there, and that is where she would reside until her demise. So circling back to June 26, 1987, Anna Mae is met by an unwarranted visitor, and within 30 seconds to a minute of this visitor entering her home, she is struggling with this person for her life. They are tussling, they are struggling, fighting back and forth, knocking everything over in their path, and at the same time this is going on, Anna Mae's actual guests are now at the door. So Antonio knocks on the door and he's not hearing anything, and they're kind of looking at each other like, what's going on? Why is she not coming to the door? And he continues banging on the door when all of a sudden he hears screaming, and that's Anna Mae on the inside because she's literally fighting for her life. And so she's yelling for Antonio to kick the door down. Without hesitation, he gets ready to kick the door down when all of a sudden the doorknob turns and the door flies open, and this woman just bolts out of Anna Mae's apartment covered in blood. And when I say covered, I don't mean Jesus. She looked more like, what's that girl's name from that movie, Carrie? The Carrie movie. You know how they did that prank and they dumped the paint on her and she just had it like just dripping all down her body and the whole school was laughing at her. Oh my gosh, that was so embarrassing. Imagine that, but just like from waist up. Like this woman literally had all the blood all over her, and then her shirt that she wore was sleeveless, so her arms were all exposed like mine are right now, and all of this was covered in blood too. It was just a nightmare. So instinctively, Antonio grabs this woman because where are you going? How you think you're just gonna run past me and my sister-in-law is inside and you covered up in blood and healthy, able to run out here? What's she looking like in there? He's like struggling to keep her in his grips because of all this blood. And unfortunately, because it's so bloody and slippery, she's able to like slip through his fingers and she takes off. She takes off and Antonio's like, and takes off right after her, right? Like, I could not even imagine coming to my sister's house and that happens. Like, that's out of control. So in any case, Antonio is, he's chasing her. He's like literally catching up to this girl. So this girl turns around and tells him, if you keep on running, I will pull out a gun and shoot you. And so he's thinking like, okay. She's already seriously harmed someone in the apartment and she has proof, right? So the chances of her following through with what she's telling him are pretty high. So if I was Antonio, I would stop chasing her. And that's exactly what he did, because it doesn't make sense to have possibly 2 dead people and then the assailant still gets away. He makes the executive decision to let her go, and then he turns back to the apartment to see what's going on, because they don't even know if there's someone else in there or if it was just this woman. So when they walk inside, oh my gosh, they see everything, and it literally just looks so crazy. So they immediately rush to the aid of Anna Mae, where they see like this phone cord wrapped around her neck and she's literally struggling for air. And so, they're holding on to her hand, trying to comfort her, and they ask her like, who was that? And she tells them that she has no idea who that woman was. She just kind of barged in, and next thing you know, she just takes her final breaths, and Anna Mae Florence is now dead. So now at this point, Lily and Antonio are in complete shock. They just cannot believe what happened, and the fact that Lily's sister has just died in front of her. She's hysterical at this point. So they call the police, and when the police make it over to her apartment, they are equally as shocked with what they came and saw, which was literally a bloodbath. So there was arterial bleeding, which, if you're unfamiliar with the terminology, Anna Mae was stabbed in the neck area, so the knife more than likely sliced an artery or more, and so needless to say, she would have bled out. There would not have been anything that Lily or Antonio could have done to help her if she had already been stabbed that deeply. Everything is flipped upside down, torn, thrown, blood everywhere, all over the floor, the walls. It was just a scene out of a movie, basically. And so they're trying to gather up evidence. They're looking for anything that may be helpful as to who this woman was and why she did what she did, but they could not find anything linking anyone to this crime except for one thing. And that was a partial handprint or a partial thumb or fingerprint on the wall. Other than that, there was nothing that they could do, because this is 1987, so DNA was still not a thing. DNA testing, which, fun fact, I actually looked it up, and DNA testing was introduced into the world of forensics around like 1986. So this is 1987. Like, they're still trying to figure out what it is exactly, and so therefore they're not using that. All they got is like fingerprints, interviews, very old school formalities of how to solve crime. I believe DNA wasn't formally introduced until like 1993 or sometime in like the late to mid 90s, something like that. Anyway, that's all they had. So the detectives thought, okay, well, maybe this girl lives close by and, saw this as a crime of opportunity. Maybe she knew that Anna Mae was living alone or something, because even though Anna Mae didn't know her, doesn't mean that the girl didn't know Anna Mae. So the police decide to scour the area based off of what Lily and Antonio told them about the girl. So Lily and Antonio had told the detectives what Anna Mae had told them right before she passed away, that the person was a black female. She was young, she was very well dressed, like kind of like church attire almost, and that's all they had. So they decided to go ahead and like canvass the area, knock on doors to see if anyone fit that description that lived nearby. And as they were canvassing, a lot of the neighbors stated that they too had received a visit from this girl that they're claiming killed Anna Mae, and she was basically soliciting money for a funeral, some people said. But then I also read that other people were saying she said that it was for like a fundraiser of some sort. But needless to say, she needed the money for something, and she was willing to get it wherever she could. So she could have possibly targeted Anna Mae thinking that she had a lot of money. No one really knows at this point. After canvassing the neighborhood, detectives gather up a couple of females that fit the description of what Antonio and Lily described, and they interview them all, fingerprint them all, but unfortunately all of their fingerprints come back negative. This is probably like the same day or the next day, and they literally have no leads. They don't have anything that can help them get any closer to finding out why this happened and who did it. 2 days later, on June 28th, 1987, police are literally stumped. They have no leads, and if they don't figure out something quickly, this is going to turn into a cold case, which they don't want. They get a phone call from the tip hotline, and a man calls in stating that he has information about the recent murder that happened. And so they're like, what murder and what information do you have? And so this person goes on to say he's referring to the murder of Anna Mae. And so he goes on to tell detectives that he was at a party or a gathering or something of the sort, and he overheard this woman telling some people that she was the one who had committed that crime and that she had stabbed her and took some money. Detectives cannot believe what they hear, because what are the chances that you get a phone call after you have exhausted all of your options and it's literally like presented to you on a silver platter, right? This person is telling them, and so they're asking him like, okay, well, what's your name? You know, how do you know this person? And so this is where he starts to get a little shaky. He's not, oh, sorry guys, I think I'm out of focus here. Hold on. Come on, camera. Don't do me. Okay. So anyway, you know, they're really trying to see if this guy will give forth some more information, like who he is, some credible, you know, details. And so he's kind of hesitant, and he's like, you know, I don't know if I really want to do that. And the detectives, they're trying to like reassure him like, hey bro, you're not in trouble. We just need this information. And so after a little while, he kind of thinks about it, and then he's like, you know, okay, fine. So he gives his name, he gives his birthday, and he gives his social security number. And the guy's name is Odell. In addition to giving his name, he also states that he knows the person that committed the crime. Like, this is a slam dunk case, my guy. You have just saved the detectives like so much time. So he goes on to give the detectives the person's name, and so then they're like, okay, well, can you go ahead and come down to the station so we can get an official police report? And so he's like, yeah, sure. You know, he's already given up his social and all the other stuff. Why not? So Odell makes his way down to the precinct, and right when they're getting ready to take down his official statement, he changes his mind. He doesn't want to do it anymore. Could you imagine being an officer, the detective who took that call, and then you're super stoked that you're about to get all of this and, you know, officially like on the record. This guy calls you, tells you what he knows, gives you his name and everything else under the sun, shows up to the precinct, and then says, never mind. That's crazy. Now detectives are just like dumbfounded. They have no other lead except for the person's name that Odell gave to them when he spoke to them on the phone. So, quick side note, I forgot to mention the reason why Odell had turned down the police was because they got him down to the precinct in order to try and convince him to wear a wiretap around his friend so that they could get the confession caught on tape. But after considering that, I guess he decided he was not going to participate, and he shut it down. So since Odell did not want to be an informant for the police, this left detectives with no other option but to go find her themselves. And that person was Danita Campbell. Now, according to Odell, him and Danita know each other from high school, so they went to school together for about 3 years, and so that's how they know each other. And so with this information, detectives start looking all over the town for Danita. A lot of them were in civilian clothes so that it wouldn't give off any warnings and she wouldn't try to like take off. And eventually they came across her driving in her car, so they pulled her over for some kind of traffic infraction or something, handcuffed her, took her prints, took her down to the precinct. So because this was a traffic infraction, they didn't have a lot of time to keep her there. So as soon as they got there, they took her prints and turned them in so that they could get matched. This whole time, they're kind of like questioning her. They're just doing whatever they can to buy them some time. And then eventually the match is completed and it comes back negative. Yeah, girl, it came back negative. I was so pissed off because I'm like, wait, Odell said it was definitely Danita. He knew the girl, so how could it not be Danita? How could she not be the person? She was the only person there. Odell heard her telling the story. He knows who the girl is, so it's not like this was just some random person he pulled out of nowhere. Like, she existed. She was the person. Like, what do you mean her fingerprints didn't match? So either Odell had some wires crossed or some crazy weird phenomenon is happening with this girl's fingerprints. In any case, once they determined that she was not the person that they were looking for, or at least I'll say her fingerprints didn't match, then they had no other lead. And so eventually Anna Mae's case goes cold. And unfortunately, during that time, one of Anna Mae's brothers also passed away due to just depression from not knowing what happened to his sister. And so he actually made a request to his daughter to find out who that girl was that killed his sister. So that was his last request to his daughter, Becky, before he passed away. For years, Becky would try to follow up with the police department to see if there were any new breaks in the case, but she would never get any updates. And so one day, on October 27th, 2012, 27 years later, 27 years later, Becky calls again and she gets a detective by the name of Detective Justice, which I think is so ironic. Like, of all the people, she gets someone whose last name is Justice. So Detective Justice answers the phone and Becky's like, who's working on my aunt's case? And so the detective is like, okay, well, first off, let's make sure that this case actually exists and it's still open, or like what happened, because, you know, people can call and make up things on the phone all the time. So she looked it up and she saw there was a real case. So her and another detective by the name of Ralph Taylor were assigned to this case. So since it was a cold case, a lot of times it's normal practice to just start from the beginning, because clearly there has to be something that was missed or something that can be added in order to bring more value to the case and hopefully get it closed. For Detective Justice, she actually liked to go to the graves of those who were deceased to kind of like channel in with their spirits or something. Like, that was just like a thing that she did. She swears by it that it works. She said it doesn't work for all officers, but for her it works. And so that's what she did. And so they decided to go ahead and go through all of the evidence, and then they also wanted to try and revisit the crime scene, except there was one problem. The crime scene no longer existed. So the apartment complex where Anna Mae lived actually got demolished, and since then new homes were built, and so they didn't have a crime scene to revisit anymore, which meant that the only thing detectives had to rely on was the evidence that was collected back in 1987. I really should have picked a better place to freeze the screen, but whatever, I've seen worse days. So in any case, the next clip got corrupted somehow. So to fill in the context here, at this point, this is where Detective Justice, Detective Taylor, and the fingerprint analyst are going through all of the evidence from 20 plus years ago. Those three went through the evidence and they just kind of like went through everything, and everything was literally covered in blood. They found a phone that was covered in blood, the fan that was tossed over that I mentioned before, blood. They also had a chair that had fallen over, blood was all over that too. Then they actually had the murder weapon, which was a knife that was found next to Anna Mae's body. Obviously that had dried blood too, 27-year-old blood dried on that. And then there was a door that they removed, her front door, that also had blood. Like, literally it just screamed bloodbath. Like, this woman fought for her life. That's really all they had to go off of. And then of course that partial fingerprint. So with that partial fingerprint, it was really hard for the detectives 27 years ago when they did find Anita to try and match the print, because it was already kind of like in poor condition due to the fact that it was a partial and it was kind of smeared, because when Antonio had come to the door and knocked on it, Anna Mae knew she was expecting guests, but the intruder did not. That distracted her and she ran to the window to look to see who was at the door. And when she leaned on the wall, that thumb kind of like tapped the wall a bit, and that's how that partial print came about, which she probably didn't even notice happened. Because if it was me, I would have smeared it up some more so that you can't get no fingerprint off of that. But then again, I wouldn't have been in that scenario because I'm not out here trying to kill people. But in any case, so that's basically where the detectives were with that. They just kept digging through all of that, and then they stumbled across some tapes. and they weren't sure if the tapes were going to play or not, because again, they've been sitting in that box for over 2 decades, nearly 3 decades. So they go to play the tapes, and they are interviews with Odell. So on the tape that detectives came across, it's actually more of the interview that the detectives in 1987 had with Odell. So Odell goes on to say in the tapes that Danita actually stole the cash, and that Anna Mae also had a social security check or some kind of welfare check in her purse as well, but she didn't take that. She left that behind. And so they go into the evidence to see if a purse was collected, and there was, and they look inside of Anna Mae's purse and they see that the check is in there. And so now they're like, okay, he had to be telling the truth, because there's no way that he would have known that the check was in her purse unless he was the one who killed her or someone told him. And clearly we already know that there was only a woman there who went in for the money and left. They knew they had Danita. They just had to figure out how they could tie her to this case. So since the partial fingerprint really wasn't doing it for them, and they had already compared that fingerprint to Danita 25 plus years ago, they had to try a different angle, right? So Kathy, who is Detective Justice, she's reviewing the photos, just looking at everything that the detectives did back then, which, you know, even though there were some mistakes, some big mistakes made, they definitely did a really good job of like collecting all the evidence, because had it not been for that evidence and the photos that they took, literally there would have been no case, and there's a good chance that this case may have never been solved, but eventually it does, which we're gonna get to. So Kathy's reviewing all of the evidence photos, just trying to see if there's anything that sticks out, when all of a sudden she notices a picture of a recliner chair, and on the recliner there's a jar of mayonnaise. And so she thinks to herself, like, that's strange. Why would mayonnaise be laying on a couch or a chair of all places? Like, Anna Mae was not the type of person that had like a hoarder type of house or things out of place. Like, Anna was pretty neat, and so having mayonnaise on a chair just was very much out of character. It just didn't make sense. So they decided to look in the evidence to see if maybe the mayonnaise jar was in evidence, and it was. So they took the mayonnaise jar and gave it over to look for any fingerprints, and they found one. They found a fingerprint, but the way the fingerprint was positioned on the jar, it's not like how someone would hold the jar to open it, but rather the opposite way. So as if someone was holding the jar upside down to use as a weapon to maybe like knock someone out. And so that's how they discovered that this has to be Danita's fingerprint, because Anna Mae wouldn't hold it like that. So they now have a fresh fingerprint to work with. Now they just got to find Danita. Now it's been 25 years, so they don't even know if the woman's alive, because a lot of people since this crime happened have passed away, including Anna Mae's brother. So, you know, a lot of times with cold cases, the chips are normally stacked high against you. Okay guys, so I had to take my glasses off because they were really hurting the bridge of my nose. Like, I was starting to get a headache. This is one of those scenarios where forensics really came through as the MVP for this case, because there was just certain things that detectives back in the 1980s would not have been able to do because it didn't exist. So how they were able to get the fingerprint off of the mayonnaise jar was basically they put the mayonnaise in like a container, and they used super glue vapor, and it was able to like show any prints that were on the jar, and that's how they were able to discover the one print that was upside down. So they had to know that it was Danita's and no one else's. Now that they have this really good fingerprint, detectives are like, now we got to figure out how are we going to get a good print from Danita. And then that's when they think, oh yeah, she got pulled over back in 1987, so the fingerprint card has to be in the evidence. So they go looking for the evidence, and apparently it got tossed or lost. Whatever the case was, those fingerprints were gone. Like, are you kidding me? They finally have a breakthrough. They finally have a good print to compare, and now Danita's prints are nowhere to be found. So now they've got to look for Danita, and hopefully she's alive. This has been 25 years plus. So a lot of things have changed. People die, people move, things happen. So yeah, things aren't looking good. So now detectives have a whole new task at hand. They got to find out where Danita is, and hopefully she's still local and alive. So they try looking her up, and y'all, they have to have the luckiest streak ever, because not only was Danita still alive and living in Columbus, but she had a warrant out for jaywalking. Jaywalking, of all things? That's crazy. I wonder if I have one out for jaywalking. I gotta make sure I don't commit no crime so they don't get me. As soon as they see that she has the jaywalking warrant, they go and find her and they arrest her immediately and take her prints. So as soon as they get those prints from Danita, they rush over to the examiner. They run, not walk. They run over to her and tell her to get those matched up, because they don't have a lot of time to keep her held there for a jaywalking warrant, of all things, right? So they're trying to get these results back before they have to release her, because now that they've arrested her, chances are she knows why she's here. And as soon as she's free to flee as well. Now, mind you, while they were trying to match up this fingerprint, they were interrogating Danita, asking her these questions related to Anna Mae, like, you know, what happened, you know, take us from the top. And the whole time Danita is telling these people she did not do it. She's not talking. She's not saying anything because she didn't do it. And she was sticking to her guns. She kept saying that back in 1987, and she's saying it now in 2012 that she didn't do it. And of course, detectives are not new to this. They are true to this. So they know that criminals are going to say any and everything to get out of what they did. So they're just like, okay, girl, whatever, we got you. And the print's going to come back and they're going to put you up. Because one thing about evidence, it doesn't lie. So the examiner is making sure that all her T's are crossed and I's are dotted, because listen, we have to have this right. And if we don't, then we don't have anything else to go off of. We got two good prints. We've got one off the mayonnaise jar, and we also have one from Danita in the 2000s. Okay, so this is not even a 1987 Danita, this is 2012 Danita. And so when they compare the prints do not match. Y'all, how is Danita cheating jail a second time? A second time. Her fingerprints don't match. Something is not adding up here. 1 + 1 ain't 2. Because how is she doing this 2 times and they're not matching? So police are left scratching their head. The examiner is left scratching her head, because she did her job and she did it well. She had a good fingerprint off that mayonnaise jar, and she had 2012 Danita print. Not even 1987 Danita, but 2012 Danita. So there should have been no reason why those fingerprints did not line up. Something just wasn't adding up here. Like, they just knew this was going to be an open and shut case once they got these good prints, because they figured, okay, it must be the print smear that didn't match up right the first time, but now we got you, girl. We got you, and you ain't getting away this time. Only for her to get away again. So everyone is sitting there left with their heads being scratched, wondering what happened. Where did we go wrong? How is this not matching? Odell said it was Danita. So how is Danita getting away with this again? So detectives decide, okay, it's time to put on the thinking caps. We're going to have to go ahead and revert back to how this all started. We need to link up with Odell, because if it wasn't for Odell calling in, keeping this case alive, we wouldn't have any of these leads to go off of. So we need to start back from ground zero. So they decide to try to go back into the case files. There isn't any address for Odell. There isn't a photo of Odell. They don't know what he looks like. They don't know where to find him. And I'm just thinking, like, how could these detectives not take a picture of the man when he came to the precinct? How could they not get his address? Like, isn't that common practice? What if they needed to follow up with him with something later on, right? How would they have been able to go find him? All they did was take a birthday and a social. So I was just like, wow. So they lost Danita's fingerprints, which forced them to have to look her up, and luckily she was there. And then now they don't have anything related to Odell other than his testimony that they have on recording. All right, so now detectives have to search for Odell. So they go through the DMV records and they come across his license after like a couple days, and they find a new address. So they go to Odell and they interview him, and they're like, listen, this whole case is riding off of your tip, your testimony, your call into the precinct, right? And we have apprehended the same person on 2 separate occasions now, back in the 1980s and now in the 2000s, and she has come back negative both times. So the math ain't mathin'. 2 + 2 is not 4. So what's going on? And so Odell is just like, what are y'all talking about? That's not me. I didn't do it. And you know, detectives, they're not new to this. They're true to this. And this is not their first rodeo. They know that suspects or people people who call in or whatever. Well, Odell wasn't a suspect, but you know, they understand that people recant a lot and they get nervous. And so they're thinking like, okay, so either Odell is in on this hoax or something, just he knows something and is scared. So they're like, you called us. He's like, I didn't call you. I didn't talk to you. Da 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 da. And so now they're like, okay, I'm done with you playing in my face. So they play the tapes for him. They're like, that's you telling us all this stuff. And on the recording, it plays him spelling his name out for them when they asked him for his name, because initially he was hesitant to give it to them, and then eventually they convinced him to provide that information. And so Odell is sitting there like, listen, there's no way that's me, because I cannot read and I cannot write, so I don't know how to spell my name. I would not have known how to do that back then. And I'm like, what? Another bomb. This case just literally, when you think everything is like an open and shut case, the case just gets so wide open. It's too much air to breathe in. It's too much. What? That's not you? And he's like, no. So now detectives have just realized that this is the first time since the case opened that they are actually talking to the real Odell. So who the hell is that? Who is that they were talking to then? Okay, so do you know who this could be? Like, is there anyone that you know that would, you know, because Odell is now scared because he's like, that's not me, but this person knew all of his information. That was his correct social. That was the correct spelling of his name. That was his correct birthday. All the stuff that the guy was saying, that was his info. And so they're like, do you know anyone who has your information, who would know all of that? And he was like, yeah, my cousin. And so he was stating how, you know, again, because he was illiterate back then, he didn't know how to read or write. So his cousin would accompany him to job interviews, and his cousin would be the one to fill out the applications for him. So of course, he knew all of Odell's information. Y'all, this case just gets more and more confusing. Like, sometimes I really be feeling for detectives because they be having to go through all of this nonsense when people just can't be upfront. Like, they gotta be the ones to weed through the bullshit, basically. Like, I would literally lose my mind if I had to do this repeatedly for years as my career. I really would. Like, if you don't tell me the truth before I knock your teeth. So now that they've discovered that the first set of detectives didn't ID this guy when he came to the precinct, they're just like, wow. So now they gotta go and find Odell's cousin, Chris. So again, because Odell is not literate, they gotta go look him up. And so they have this address which is linked to Chris's mom's house. They head over to the mom's house with the hopes that Chris would still be living there, because according to Odell, that's where he would be. So they head over to Chris's mom's house, and Chris's mom opens the door asking how she can help them, and they say they're looking for Chris. And this is in relation to the case of Anna Mae Florence from 1987. So at this point, the mom opens the door all the way. Y'all, tell me why Chris is sitting right there in the living room. What are the chances that he would still be living there and present at the time that they show up to the house? Listen, that's Anna Mae. That's all Anna Mae. Anna Mae say, listen, y'all ain't gonna mess this up a second time. I'm gonna make sure I get my justice. Go over there right now. They go over and he's there, and they start questioning him basically the same way that they started questioning the real Odell. And, you know, they start asking him like why he lied to police about his identity. Like, you knew all of the correct information, so why didn't you just give you the proper name, da da da. And so he just kind of like was cold with the police. He didn't really say anything. He didn't want to talk, none of that. And so when they realized they weren't getting anywhere with him, they started talking to his mom. And then his mom looked at him and said, you better tell them people what they want to know. I don't know what it is about moms, but they just have this power over you. It's like, yes ma'am. Whatever power she had, on top of that, he's living with her, so he knew if he wanted to stay up under that house, he better tell them what he knows. Hesitantly, he goes on to say that it actually was him on the tape, because he was denying that it was him. The reason why he concealed his identity is because he was actually told the story about the murder of Anna Mae Florence by the murderer herself, and that he knew who she was, and had promised not to say anything. And so he wanted someone to go down for the crime, but he didn't want to sell out his friend. So he chose Danita because he knew that she also like had a little rap sheet or whatever. And so he would have been fine with someone getting arrested for the crime as long as it wasn't his friend. He was willing to let an innocent woman go to jail for a crime that his friend committed. I mean, I see the loyalty, but damn, that's messed up. That's real messed up. So now detectives are awarded with a new task at hand. So they now went from hunting down Danita, not getting her prints matched, finding her again years later, prints not matching again, finding out that the voice they knew to be Odell was not Odell, speaking to the real Odell, and discovering that the voice they knew to be Odell was really Odell's cousin Chris, and then talking to Chris and persuading his mom, only to find out that he didn't overhear this conversation, but it was directly told to him by the culprit themselves, and he had this knowledge for 25 plus years. My brain hurts. It hurt. I could not imagine being the detectives. Oh my goodness. So now detectives have to go and find this friend and hope and pray that she's alive. Okay, so the glasses are back and detectives are literally just dumbfounded at this point. Like, bro, you knew about this crime for how many years and you just were gonna sit on it for all this time? Like, that's crazy. So before he tells them who this person is, he goes into detail about what exactly happened the day that he found out about the information. So he stated that she had came over to his house and they sat down, and she stated that she needed to tell him something. That's when she divulged that she actually owed a drug dealer some money. She was really desperate and decided to start knocking on doors to get money, and she masked it as a fundraising opportunity or something of the sort. So then when she made it to Anna Mae's house, Anna Mae had let her into her home and actually had given her some money, and she was gonna be on her way, but greed got the best of her because she saw that Anna Mae had more cash in her purse, and so she thought she could just take the money and run, and Anna Mae fought back, and that's how things kind of transpired. And so from what this woman stated was that she had knocked her out or tried to knock her out with the phone, and then Anna Mae had the knife, in which Anna Mae had it for self-defense, and she fought Anna Mae for the knife and then, you know, did what she did. So Chris goes on to say the reason why he impersonated his cousin Odell was because he didn't want word to get back that he was actually the one who ratted out his friend, but he definitely wanted justice for Anna Mae. And so he had heard through the grapevine that Miss Danita had been caught up in some illegal activity. So what's a murder charge to go right along with all of that, right? And that's why he blamed her instead of his friend, because he didn't want his friend to go down for a crime that she committed and confessed to him about. And I don't think he got in trouble for that either. I don't think they took him in or anything, which is wild because you really had these police chasing the wrong woman for over 2 decades. And then on top of that, you knew who the killer really was all this time. So in any case, the detectives are now wanting to know what is the name of this friend. And he would state that her name was Xena Roberson. So now detectives have yet another task. They got to find out where Xena is, because if you thought that Chris was just going to give up that information, you thought wrong. He already felt bad snitching on his friend, so the last thing he was going to do was to give the police what they wanted on a silver platter. That just was not going to happen. Okay, y'all, I had to do away with the glasses because I just can't, not today. So now that they know who the culprit is, they have to find out how they're going to find her, because just a name is not enough, being that a lot of people share the same name. So the detectives, they did know that Xena lived pretty close to Chris. So with that address, they were able to do like some kind of reverse search or something, and they came across a hit of a driver's license that she had back when she was 16. So they used that information, and what do you know? Miss Xena was still up to her no good shenanigans, because she got arrested in Georgia for shoplifting. And guess what else, y'all? Since she got arrested, her prints were on file. So they decided to go ahead, take those prints and match those to the ones that they found on the mayonnaise jar. And what do you know? A match. So now that they finally have their culprit. They have the right person. They can finally leave Danita alone. So now that they know 1000% that it is Xena, they got to figure out how are they going to get Xena extradited back to Ohio. So they reach out to detectives in Georgia and they fly down there and they say, you know, we're willing to help any way we can. And the police are like, we don't do things like that anymore, honey. We just get on social media and let the people tell us. And that's exactly what they did. They hopped on Facebook and they posted 2 mugshots of Xena and asked if they had seen that person. And then literally within like minutes, it was really fast, someone had commented stating that, oh, I see this woman every day when I go to the bus at this corner. And I'm like, damn, that is some good ass police work. It's like all the cards were finally lining up. So once they have this information, they make their way over to Xena's house and she answers the door. I cannot believe how lucky these detectives were. And when they introduce themselves and give her the reason why they are there, she completely looked flushed. I really wish these cops would have played the lottery or something, because the way the chips were just falling into place. She invites them in, and at this point they know they have her, because her whole demeanor just gave it away. It's like she knew that this day was coming. She just didn't know when it was gonna come. So like I said, Xena lets the officers into her home. They all have a seat in her living room and they can just tell the tension is super thick. Like you could cut it with a knife, like the knife she used to kill Anna Mae. It was like nothing needed to be said because you already knew. But nonetheless, they had to confirm. So they started asking her some light questions about Columbus, Ohio, and what she may have known in reference to the murder of Anna Mae Florence. And so that's where Xena starts to say, yeah, I'm from Columbus and yeah, I used to live there, but I don't know nothing about no murder. So she immediately starts denying any association to the crime, even though she confessed to her friend like a dummy. She should have kept that to herself. If she would have kept that information to herself, there's a good chance that no one would have ever figured out what happened. But that's that guilt. It kills you and you have to tell someone, and it eats away at their soul, and they will eventually tell someone else or release the information on their dying day. But in any case, Xena was not letting up, and the cops told her, well, if you're not willing to tell us anything here, then you're gonna have to come back with us. I mean, either way, she was gonna have to go. So they extradited her back over to Ohio, and that is where they immediately took her into questions, like an interrogation room, to ask her further questions. Before they began, they read her rights and they tried to ask her questions, but she lawyered up immediately. And so they knew at this point that it was a done deal. If she wasn't willing to talk, they knew they had her at that point. Miss Xena did go into trial. Anna Mae's family finally got the chance to confront their aunt's killer, and they said their piece to her. And to be honest, it really didn't look like she cared much when I saw the trial footage. Nonetheless, they said what they needed to say to her, and Xena Roberson was charged and found guilty of murder, and she was charged to 15 years to life in prison.
Anna Mae died after someone repeatedly stabbed her in her home at this Columbus apartment complex. That was in 1987, and for the next 26 years, police would make no arrests in the case. Then, last summer, they caught up to Xena Roberson. She was living in Rome, Georgia. Cold case detectives found new fingerprint evidence in the bloody scene and got a witness to admit that Roberson had confessed. At her sentencing today, Roberson admitted to it again.
I am so sorry. I wish I could bring her back, but I can't. I am so sorry.
But sorry just can't erase 27 years of grief.
I had part of the responsibility to go back to that apartment where she was killed, to clean up that mess and to get that stuff out, and I am still wounded. She just wasn't somebody you just threw away. She was somebody to care about.
The judge
to violently kill
gave Roberson
a senior citizen is just so reprehensible.
a sentence of 15 years to life. Even that couldn't dry the family's tears.
So much pain, and it's like,
in prison. So Yay! Victory for Anna Mae. Finally, that is the story of Anna Mae Florence, and we definitely want to congratulate the family for being persistent. And now Anna Mae's soul can rest in peace right along with her brothers. They are also able to fulfill the brothers' wishes to get Anna Mae's justice. If you guys have any requests for a case you would like me to talk about on here, feel free to leave it in the comments section and subscribe to the channel. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in another true crime story soon.